Welcome to the Brain Warriors Way podcast. I'm Dr. Daniel Amen.
And I'm Tana Amen. Here we teach you how to win the fight for your brain to defeat anxiety, depression, memory loss, ADHD, and addictions.
The Brain Warriors Way podcast is brought to you by Amen Clinics, where we've transformed lives for 3 decades using brain SPECT imaging to better target treatment and natural ways to heal the brain. For more information, visit amenclinics.com.
The Brain Warriors Way podcast is also brought to you by BrainMD, where we produce the highest quality nutraceutical products to support the health of your brain and body. For more information, visit brainmdhealth.com. Welcome to the Brain Warriors Way podcast. And stay tuned for a special code for a discount to Amen Clinics for a full evaluation, as well as any of our supplements at brainmdhealth.com.
Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about a subject that is near and dear to my heart, even though I didn't grow up in an alcoholic home. We're going to talk about the long-term impact and talk about children and grandchildren of alcoholics. Alcohol devastates the brain. It's one of the most common preventable causes of Alzheimer's disease.
So I have a question. When you say adult children of alcoholics, how do other substances weigh in on this?
It's actually very similar. You can be an adult child of a cocaine addict.
Okay. Heroin addict.
Meth head, heroin.
Right. Okay.
The issue is when you grow up with chronic stress, it changes your brain. It changes your gut. It changes how your brain functions. And I have a very personal connection to this because my first wife, when I got married, and I had known her as a teenager. She was my first love. Talked to her every day for 3 years and had no idea her dad was beating her mom.
Oh my gosh.
I had no idea the police were called to her house. I had no idea of the yelling, the screaming, the trauma that was going on. My house, I have 5 sisters, so there was plenty of yelling.
Totally different context.
But there was not chronic unpredictability,
your parents
chronic stress, and so on. I grew up in a fairly normal household. And even though I talked to her every day, she was so ashamed by it. It never came up in our conversations, which is sort of unbelievable. And then I went in the Army and, she moved away. And like 6 or 7 years later, we got back together and we got married. She was just mad all the time. And I didn't understand that. And a couple of months into being married, she tried to kill herself. And I took her to see a wonderful psychiatrist, and I came to realize if he helped her, which he did, his name was Stan Wallace. He was the chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at ORU, where I was in medical school. I came to realize if Dr. Wallace helped her, it wouldn't just help her. It would help me.
Right.
And ultimately help the children, even the grandchildren, because they'd be shaped by someone who was happier and more stable. I became a psychiatrist because of her issues and because of Dr. Wallace. I just loved him. And he began to bring up her childhood. And she's like, oh, my dad didn't have a problem.
Right. Right. It's funny how
and we were talking about that one. I'm like, what do you mean your dad didn't have a problem? The police don't come to your door if there's not a problem.
Right.
And she almost felt like it was a betrayal to say he was an alcoholic. But the definition of alcoholism or drug abuse is if you drink or use drugs and it causes a problem either with your health and your relationships, with your money or with the law, if you drink and it causes a problem, and then you drink again if you don't realize this is ruining my life, then that's our definition of someone who's addicted.
Right.
And so as I began to learn about her history, I had no idea. There was a whole body of literature already about what's the psychological impact of people who grow up with chronic trauma. And it was three things. Claudia Black had written a book right about that time, and actually later became friends with her. The book's called Adult Children of Alcoholics. Is they learn not to talk, because we don't talk about this stuff. Not to trust.
Right.
I mean, I just married her. It's like, why are you not trusting me? And not to feel. So they block trusting, talking, and feelings. And it comes out in so many other ways.
Right.
From panic attacks to depression to suicide.
Substance abuse.
To substance abuse for many, not for Robin. And it just completely blew my mind. So what I did when I was a child psychiatry fellow is I studied children and grandchildren of alcoholics. And I found they actually had a very high incidence of ADD, attention deficit disorder, but not the kind that responds to stimulants. They had a kind we call over-focused ADD. So they have a lot of ADD symptoms. But in addition, they're worried, they're rigid, they're inflexible. If things don't go their way, they get upset. And in 1994, I actually wrote a book about this called Healing the Chaos Within. Because what I found is on a combination of substances to increase dopamine for the ADD and increase serotonin for the worry, it was remarkable.
So I am curious. So much of what you talk about. So my mother was not an alcoholic, but there were substances in my house, and so much
Lots.
lots of substances in my house. So much of what you talk about, sort of that profile, sort of fit me. The being anxious, not trusting the environment. You're a little worried all the time. The sort of that over focused tendency. And what's interesting is that on
Are you saying I'm addicted to this female type?
maybe, but my question is so but that wasn't my mom. Okay, so but with being in the house, can it affect you the same way if it's just in the house?
Well, you grew up with chronic trauma. You never knew what was going to happen.
And a lot of it had to do with substances, just not my mom.
Right.
So
that can clearly have an impact.
Now, the other thing I want to point out is family dynamics are so complicated. So my parents were divorced, whatever, and my half sisters grew up in a house where there was substance abuse, and I think that I ended up with more stability. As bad as it was, there was more stability because my mother didn't abuse substances.
Well, and interestingly, in our research and other people's research on children of alcoholics, if the dad's an alcoholic, that's a big problem. If the mom's an alcoholic, it's a freaking disaster.
Right. So my sisters had a lot.
Women still are primary caretakers for children, and if the primary caretaker is unreliable, then it's a disaster.
Right. And so even though my
not
mom,
a disaster you can't fix.
Right.
And I remember when we first met, and I'm like, I could see the trauma in your brain, remember? When we scanned you. And getting a couple of sessions of EMDR, specific psychological treatment for trauma, was super helpful for you.
Yeah, no, EMDR is amazing. I actually really, really liked it. And it sort of helped me to unwind some things just like Robin. So Robin, your first wife, I know her, we're friends. But just like that, I remember meeting you and you saying, don't you think that some of these things are connected? I'm like, nope. Like, not at all. Like I was a warrior. I was ready to fight.
We're not going to talk.
Well, right. I'm like ready to fight about it. Like, right.
And we're not going to feel.
Right.
We're not going to go there.
Not going to get hurt. Not going to hurt. Not willing to do the hurt thing again. So.
Right. And so it took us a while to work through all of that. And
but
you had to break
that.
my heart once or twice. But it's all for the better.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because we're closer than we've ever been.
Oh, it was just amazing to be able to finally see it.
And it's part of the reason we bring this up, that if you grew up in a hurtful environment, there is healing for you. You are not stuck with the brain you have.
Here's what I love. I love that for as painful as it was to sort of make the decision actually the healing process wasn't that bad. Making the decision to do it was what was hard, the painful part. I did it for one specific reason. I didn't want to perpetuate the cycle. I wanted to have a happy marriage, and I wanted to make sure that I did not pass that on to my child. So that's why I did it. And that's the message I want people to hear from this.
And do you think it helped?
Oh my gosh, so much so.
How did it help?
The day that my daughter said to me, she was hearing something about my childhood, and I was like pushing her to take martial arts. And because like for me, it's a very empowering thing. I think all women should know how to defend themselves, protect themselves.
Plus, you'd been attacked.
I'd been attacked.
And safety became a huge value for you.
So I was talking to her about it. I'm like, it's not an option. I need you to, you need to be able to protect yourself. And she looked at me, she's like, Mom, I hear these stories about your past, and I am sorry for you. Like, I'm sorry that you had to go through that. I can't relate to any of it. And it struck me. I did my job well. She couldn't relate to anything I was saying. But that was actually a moment of awakening for me.
Which means you beat the cycle.
Right. She could not relate to the chaos. She could not relate to feeling unsafe. She could not relate. She's like, I don't want to walk around feeling unsafe. And she actually said that. So I'm like, okay, I want you to be aware, but I don't want you to feel unsafe either. So I realized I had to back off a little bit. But my job had been done. My goal had been met, that this kid could not relate.
And what happens in the brain for the children of alcoholics and other children who've been traumatized? In fact, we just talked about a viral video. We had a viral post, and it said something to the effect that children who grow up with trauma have the same brains as a soldier in war.
Yeah.
And so growing up with the trauma, it changed your brain to be more vigilant, to be more watchful.
So to give you an example, we stay a couple nights a week up in Los Angeles, right? Now I've got my little nest very protected where we live. So I drive up to Los Angeles, and there is just something about it's like this ground floor. It's a very nice neighborhood, but it's a ground floor. I cannot sleep. I've got the windows secured. I can't explain it, but I can hear every single noise. And any noise I hear, even near my daughter's bedroom, bam, I'm up out of bed and I'm like over there. And I know that that's because of that. I know it's because of that past. That's never going to probably go away. So it does things that change you.
But it's not as bad as it's been.
No.
And over time, by working on it, you can feel better and it can last.
Right.
Right?
Oh yeah, I feel more empowered now. That's the difference. I feel empowered. I don't feel out of control. But that's just something that happens when you grow up like that, is you're always aware. You're a little bit hypervigilant.
So if you can relate to any of this, Claudia Black's just a wonderful author. She has a number of books, but Adult Children of Alcoholics is really powerful. I also write about this in Change Your Brain, Change Your Life. Stay with us.
I will embrace my many strengths.
I will not be tormented by my past.
I will find the right balance.
I will be calm and courageous.
I will be free. I am not just bipolar.
I am not just autism.
I'm not just depression.
I am not just ADD.
I am not just anxiety.
I am not just OCD.
I am not just PTSD.
Welcome back, everybody. So I want to actually talk about something kind of fun and different today. I keep getting calls from people I know and texts about this video that's going around. It's like seriously viral. It's got like 37 million views or something crazy now. 38 million views now. And it's my husband.
Wow.
It's a little weird. It's a little bit weird.
Did it embarrass you?
No, it was super cool. It was actually really sexy. So it's really cool when your husband like goes viral like that. It's kind of awesome. So let's talk about it. Because I've heard the story a lot of times, and here's what's so interesting. This is why I thought it was so interesting. I've heard the story a lot. I've heard you tell the story a lot. I've heard it in presentations. But for some reason, this video went viral. Like, I don't know what makes things go viral. But when I watched it, I think it's because you didn't know you were actually being videotaped. Someone got it on their phone and just posted it. And so I think you were not, this wasn't like your TED Talk where it was more formal. It was just you sort of raw emotion telling the story of Andrew, who is your godson or nephew. And it was...
I get teary just thinking about
right.
telling the story.
But that's
again.
what happened. You were more raw, natural, and you didn't know that it was going to be posted like that. And
yeah, and there's a context to it that most people don't know. When we first started doing our brain imaging work here at Amen Clinics, in 1991, I was so excited. I was just like a little kid. You know,
got a new tool.
Study to help be a better doctor. I didn't make 5 cents on it. I just got really excited about it. And then...
So let me back up, because doctors pretty much, psychiatrists pretty much guess up until this point. And now you're like, oh, wait a second. I actually get to look at the brain. I get to have more targeted treatment. You weren't doing them in the clinics at the time, so you were sending people out to have them done.
Correct.
You were just excited that now you could actually be way more specific about treatment.
Right.
Okay.
And so I was an X-ray technician when I was in the Army.
So this made sense.
And our professors used to always say, how do you know unless you look? And then when I fell in love with psychiatry, for so many reasons, I fell in love with the only medical specialty that virtually never looks at the organ they treat. And I just knew that was wrong.
Right.
That we needed more biological information because stigma is so high among people who have mental health problems. No one wants to be labeled as crazy or defective. And that first lecture, I mean, I just remember it like it was yesterday. I was like smiling inside. And I walked out of the lecture to a woman's room. She'd just been admitted the night before, and she'd tried to kill herself. And I thought I knew what was going on with her, but she wouldn't cooperate. And I'm saying, well, can we look at your brain? And when she saw her brain, she started to cry, and she said, you mean it's not my fault?
Something that we actually hear a lot.
So for the first couple of years, I mean, I got really excited about it. And by 1991, I was writing a column in the local newspaper. I'd already written a couple of books. I had a big national book published in 1992. And so I had my own platform. And so because you have your own platform, when you say something that's new and different, or in this case, radical.
It's like a target on your back.
Looking at the brain before you actually go about changing it, radical. I got all sorts of criticism.
Right.
And I was not good at dealing with that. It made me mad and it made me anxious. And I didn't really know how to deal with the criticism. Mm-hmm. And then...
I just want to interject one thing, because when I met you, and we'll go back to that, but when I met you, because I know how the industry, the medical community in general thinks of psychiatry, it's like, you guys guess. And so there tends to be this, it's not a secret. I almost canceled my first date with you when I found out you were a psychiatrist. It's not a secret. So, there's just this idea that they do things differently, right? So, but I had worked for a company called Medtronic. So Medtronic did, and one of the therapies that I worked with was called deep brain stimulation, DBS. So really interesting. We had to learn, we actually worked with the brain mapping. So before they do DBS, they do brain mapping. So when I first met you, our first date, I thought, okay, I'm just going to get through this date. I'm going to be really polite, and then I'm going to leave. But it didn't go that way. Because when I first met you, you started talking about scans, and I'm like, wait, that's so interesting. Because with brain mapping, I knew exactly what you were talking about. And I'm like, you're sort of looking at the brain, like mapping it almost.
It is a map.
But it made sense. And I'm like, what?
And then right after I met you, I wanted to map your brain
Right,
because I really
right.
liked you.
But my first question was,
I didn't want to like you if your brain was messed up.
but my first question was, why aren't all psychiatrists doing this? So in my mind, it made complete sense.
Which has been my question from the moment I ordered scans. But if you go back to 1995, people were calling me a charlatan and a quack, and I'm taking advantage of mentally ill people by charging them money to look at the brain, even though in 1995, and this story actually doesn't take place in my office. I sent...
Yeah, you weren't even getting the money for it.
Right. Anyways, so all that context to say it was an anxious time for me. Loved what I did. We were beginning to see people from all over Northern California, where our first clinic was. And then late one night in April 1995, I got a call from my sister-in-law, Sherry, who told me that my 9-year-old nephew, Andrew, who's also my godson, I love this boy, had attacked a little girl on the baseball field that day for no particular reason. Horrified, I asked Sherry, I said, "Excuse me? What else is going on?" And she said, "Danny, he's different. He's mean. He doesn't smile anymore." And I went into his room today and found 2 pictures he had drawn. One of them, he was hanging from a tree. The other picture, he was shooting other children. Andrew, in retrospect, was Columbine,
Right.
or Sandy Hook, or Parkland, Florida, waiting to happen.
Right. You know, it's, as a mom, you know, with a child in school, and many people listening to this are moms with kids in school, we've seen kids like this, right? We know kids like this. And we get scared. And we don't want our kids playing with these kids. Now I have a different framework. But it's you know kids like this, and you have to wonder what makes little kids behave this way, young children behave this way.
Well, you know, when I heard that, I said, I want to see him. And they live in Southern California. At the time, I was in Northern California. And I said, I want to see him tomorrow. And I remember when I walked into the office and saw him, it's like my heart melted. Because I knew something was going on with him. And I'm like, "Buddy, what's going on?" And he said, "Uncle Danny, I don't know. I'm mad all the time." I said, "Is anybody hurting you?" He said, "No." I said, "Is anybody teasing you?" He said, "No." I said, "Is anybody touching you in places they shouldn't be touching you?" He said, "No." And my first thought was to scan him, because that's what I do. And I'd already seen hundreds of violent children. And I was suspecting he had a left temporal lobe problem. It's a part of the brain we and others had associated with violence. But my next thought was, you want to scan everybody. And so I started doing the, stuff of my training. Yeah. He's the second son in a Lebanese family. I'm the second son in a Lebanese family. That gives you all sorts of issues, trust me. His older brother's perfect. He's struggling in school. And then after about 30 seconds of that in my head, the left side of my brain went, "Stop it. 9-year-olds don't attack people for no reason. You need to scan him. And if his brain is healthy, then we can find out the psychological reason for this behavior." Because we talk about it on the show all the time, that
4 circles.
there are biological reasons people have trouble, there's psychological, there's social, and there's spiritual reasons people have trouble. And so I actually went to the imaging center. It was not part of Amen Clinics at the time. And I held his hand as he held his teddy bear. And when the scan came up on the monitor, I'd never seen one like that before. And my mentor, Jack Poldy, was there. And so his mom and dad couldn't hear. He wrote down on a piece of paper, cyst, tumor, or stroke.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm horrified, but I'm also glad we have a reason that Andrew was acting the way he was. And we got an MRI that day. We found a cyst the size of a golf ball occupying the space of his left temporal lobe. And I called his pediatrician in Orange, California, Southern California, and I said, you find someone to take this out. And he called 3 neurologists and called me back a week later, and he said...
A week?
A week later. And he said none of the neurologists would recommend operating on him, that they didn't think it was related to his symptoms. And oh, by the way, they wouldn't ever consider operating until he had real symptoms. And I remember...
The thought of shooting other children is not a real symptom, I guess.
It's a behavioral problem. And many years ago, there was a divorce between psychiatry and neurology. And psychiatry is the specialty that didn't get the
Now,
brain.
as a mom, if that's your kid, that's a real symptom, by the way.
And so I'm screaming at Dr. Hall, what do you mean real symptoms? I have a homicidal, suicidal child.
Right.
And he got really anxious. And I called a friend of mine, a pediatric neurologist at Harvard, and she told me the same thing. And I started screaming at her too. And then I'm thinking to myself, neurologists, neurosurgeons. Neurosurgeons do stuff. And so I called the
Yes, I'm a
pediatric...
neurosurgical ICU nurse. That's why I thought what you did was so cool. So yeah, I can relate to this.
And so I called UCLA and talked to the pediatric neurosurgeon. His name was Jorge Lazarev. He's famous. He separated the Guatemalan twins. But to me, he was famous before then. Because he said, when cysts are symptomatic, we drain them. He's obviously symptomatic. And after surgery, I got 2 calls, one from Sherry, Andrew's mother, who said, when Andrew woke up from surgery, he smiled at her. She said, Danny, he hadn't smiled for a year. And the second call was from Dr. Lazarev, who said, oh my God, Dr. Amen, that cyst, we didn't see it on the MRI. It was so aggressive that it actually thinned the bone over his temporal lobe. That if he would have been hit in the head, he would have died instantly.
Oh my
like
gosh.
with a basketball. Either way, he would have been dead in 6 months. And his behavior completely went back to normal. Now, it wasn't easy, right? I mean, he had to drain the cyst a number of times. But Andrew's behavior went back to normal. Sweet, loving, connected.
Well, I know Andrew today, and he's just a nice person.
It's 23 years later, and he's got a job. He owns his own home. He's married. He just got married. What would have happened if we wouldn't have looked at his brain? See, not looking is not science. It's malpractice. When you have symptoms that are not getting better with traditional things, somebody should look at the brain. And so I told that story at the end of a lecture at Saddleback Church. It's actually part of an hour-long lecture. And I told it just with raw emotion. And for some reason, somebody posted it, not me, on a website, Facebook.
Oh, I've gotten
presumably.
yeah.
And the first week, it had 7 million views. And now it's like 4 months later, it's got 38 million views. And it's got 26,000 comments.
It's crazy.
And I often won't read the comments.
Because they're too...
Because I've had plenty of haters over the years, and it's like I just don't need the grief. But one day I decided I would start reading them. And they just made me cry. They're so beautiful about how they've had family members who've had similar things.
Now, I know the story, but that had an impact on your anxiety at the time about whether or
I
not...
completely lost my anxiety. If, when it's so personal, that if you don't look at the brain of somebody who's struggling, shame on you. It's
I'm sorry, because I have a personal, it just irritates me. I have to throw this in. Part of it is the financial model with our medical system is part of why it's not approved for, it's not approved by insurance, and it's not in clinical practice and all of that stuff. It has really nothing to do with whether or not it's good for patients. So it's really irritating. So I find that as a mother, if I felt that I needed it, that would really irritate me.
Well, and that's why here at Amen Clinics, we do 12-month interest refinancing, and we try to make it as affordable for everyone. And for people listening to the podcast, there's a podcast code. I think it's podcast 10, and they get a discount. But that's not the point of telling this story. The point of telling this story is this is really my passion story.
Well, I just thought it was so cool because I practice karate. And so my karate instructor actually had someone call me who said they saw this video. And at the time I didn't know about the video. I'm like, what video? Like, I thought maybe it was your TED Talk. And she's like, no, not the TED Talk. She's like, I know about that one, but that's not the video. And I'm like, what is she talking about? This video is like going around everywhere. And then I find out about it, and it was,
Terry, our CEO, was at the yoga studio. And they were passing it around, and women were crying.
Right, it's so funny. So it's really cool.
So
yeah, lots of fun.
The exciting message of that video is you're not stuck with the brain you have. You can change it. We can prove it. And one of the things we want you to be is a brain warrior, which means you're serious about your brain health and you're armed, prepared, and aware. Stay with us. Welcome back. Thank you so much for the podcast reviews. I love this one. I'm continually amazed how often I listen in and find an exact answer to a question or problem I am facing. Excellent resource and very on target. Thank you.
Love that.
Another one from Nico83. Healing my brain. I've known for a long time I've got something going on with my brain, don't we all? I've struggled with depression, anxiety, memory, weight loss. I'm so happy to have found this podcast. I feel like for the first time I found a group of people who look logically and scientifically at these issues holistically and consider one of the most important elements of our lives, our diet. I'm looking forward to hearing more and learning ways to improve my brain health and life with the smarts of Dr. Amen, Tana, and their clan. Thank you all. That is awesome. Thank you so much. Today, there was an article recently in the paper on suicides, drug addiction, and high school football. And I'm like, these are 3 epidemic crises in the United States. Yes, football is an epidemic crisis. When they own a day of the week, it's a crisis. But Madison in southeastern Indiana, which apparently is a beautiful small city, is at the center of drug trafficking triangle connecting Indianapolis,
Serious?
Cincinnati, and Louisville. And it's really, they're battling life and death problems. And a lot of the football players who get hurt get opiates, who then become addicted, and we know about the connection.
This is not it's not a unique thing though. This is going on like so many places. We live in a very nice place. The drugs are out of control. We just had a football player at Chloe's high school commit suicide and leave 3 notes for, one for teachers, one for students, and one for his parents. Kids have access to so much now. And it's tragic.
Well, and what we want them to have access to is healthy brains.
And help. They need access to help, and they need to know that they can get help and reach out for it if they need it.
So in brain health, we always talk about it's 3 things. It's brain envy. You got to care about it. So few people care. And the reason people don't care about their brains is you can't see it, right? You can see the wrinkles in your skin. I'm not looking at you. So
there are
doing that.
Plenty there.
You can see the wrinkles in your skin or the fat around your belly, and you can do something when you're unhappy with it. But because most people never look at their brains, they don't think about it. And because they don't think about it, they don't care about it. So the first thing, so you saw your scan, and
Yeah.
I said you have the beautiful woman syndrome. Your brain was awesome. I decided to keep you.
But it wasn't perfect.
But it wasn't perfect, so you just saw every flaw.
Right. I saw these little flaws magnified.
And then you wanted it better,
Right.
right? So that's brain envy. You want a better brain. So it's caring, and then it's avoiding things that hurt it.
Right.
And contact sports hurt the brain. There's no other way to say that. If you are getting hit in the head
It should be fairly
repeatedly,
obvious. Okay, you go to jail if you shake a baby. Why is this hard?
so can shaking a baby cause long-term brain
It
damage?
can kill it. You can kill it.
Or you can decrease its IQ, or
Right.
right? So if you get hit by a linebacker,
It's
that's
like shaken
200
baby
pounds,
syndrome.
It's like a shaken baby syndrome. And it's not just football. It's riding horses. You can fall off these big animals.
I mean,
or
you can
playing
get hurt
hockey.
doing almost anything, but there are some sports where it's the goal. It's the goal is to crash and smash and,
You can get hurt doing anything, but there are some sports where it's actually the goal.
the goal. Right.
Right. So I think we should be careful, and I think we should be protecting kids way more than we do.
And we've got to do a better job of educating them why drugs and alcohol, it's not just about we don't want you to not do drugs because of the morality issue. Yes, okay, there's all of that involved. That isn't just the only issue. We've got to be educating them about what it's doing to their development.
Right. And most kids don't really get that their brain is not actually fully developed until they're 25. And if they go with the early drug use option, it's actually damaging.
It's affecting their ability to get into the college they want, to get the job they want, their employability.
It's damaging and delaying their development.
Right.
So in the addiction world, we often say if you started using drugs when you were 15 and
Right.
you didn't stop till you're 30, well, emotionally you're still 15.
It
but your brain has not fully developed, and the brain has windows where it will develop during a certain period and then it won't develop after that.
Right.
So early drug use can actually have lifelong negative implications.
Well, and I don't know if anyone else has experienced this, but I recently had been working with somebody who had started using substances when she was about 12 or 13. And I'm telling you, everyone that was working, that was helping me was it's like trying to deal emotionally with a 12 or 13-year-old.
Right.
Now, fortunately, with some help over time, there began to be some emotional maturity that began to happen. But it was not easy in the beginning because you can't understand why this person can't think like everybody else. It's because that stunted growth. That stunted development.
Right. And so educating people to that is really important, because when you talk to kids, if you actually teach them to fall in love with their brains, they're so much better at it. So if you take concussions, and this person we're talking about had 19 car accidents. If you take concussions, mix it with drug addiction, you actually have a recipe for suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And I often tell my patients suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary feeling or problem.
So, and I want to, it's really important to leave a message of hope here. So this person had really hit, if there is a lower bottom than rock bottom, had hit a lower bottom than rock bottom. And we worked with her.
Basement bottom?
Something like that. So it was really bad. And so in working with her, really putting a lot of energy in and working with this person over about a year's time, what was really fun for me, just recently I spoke with her, and she not only is working now, has 2 jobs, is thriving. And then there were times where I actually questioned, is this going to happen? Are we going to be able to turn this thing around? And so all of a sudden, it was so much fun for me. Just recently, she actually said to me, she said, I was going through some of your materials, and the same stuff that I couldn't comprehend a year ago, she said, I am blown away. She goes, I see where I was a year ago and I see where I am now. And she was stunned. And she's like, I cannot believe
both of us are stunned, and we
all
do
of us
this for a living.
Right? But it was just so cool. There's a hope there. There is hope. And I don't know too many people who hit lower bottom than that.
And I talk to her 13-year-old daughter and her 8-year-old daughter all the time about protecting their brain and loving their brain. When we first brought them down, because we're helping to support them, we don't buy food
It had to be all of it.
that
We did everything.
love that doesn't love you back.
Right. Yeah. So there's a message of hope there. It's really cool.
So if you want to be part of the solution, you have to first love your brain and then teach other people how to love theirs. Share the Brain Warriors Way podcast with them too. Take care.
Thanks.
Use the code podcast10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at amenclinics.com or on our supplements at brainmdhealth.com. Thank you for listening to the Brain Warriors Way podcast. Go to iTunes and leave a review, and you'll automatically be entered into a drawing to get a free signed copy of the Brain Warriors Way and the Brain Warriors Way cookbook we give away every month.